Part 1. The limp no one noticed until he did. The wind that swept over the open prairie that spring was slow, dry, and full of whispers. On the outskirts of the sleepy town of Dry Hollow, where time moved like molasses and secrets stayed buried. Deeper than water wells, a quiet rancher named Elias Vance lived a life carved out of routine, silence, and solitude. Elias wasn't known for meddling. After burying his wife 6 winters ago and selling off half the cattle to cover the debt left behind, he'd spoken more to his horses than to the people of town. Folks respected him not for charm, but for his grit. A man who worked hard, kept quiet, and kept his own business where it belonged, on his land. He lived alone mostly. That changed a few months ago when he took on help. Her name was Maria, a young Mexican woman who'd shown up on the edge of town looking for work. She was polite, hardworking, and quiet. A soft-spoken maid who cooked, cleaned, and asked for little. Folks said she was grateful. Some said she was running. Elias didn't ask, didn't care. He needed the help, and she didn't cause trouble. But something had changed. It started one morning during the branding season. Elias had just come in from the corral, sweat clinging to his back, and spotted Maria crossing the yard with a basket of laundry. It should have been nothing, just another routine movement in the rhythm of ranch life. But something in her walk caught his eye. A slight hitch, a subtle drag of her right foot. It was there and gone so quickly that he almost doubted what he saw. He didn't mention it. But over the next few days, he kept noticing. When she walked from the cookhouse to the main cabin, when she leaned down to fetch water from the pump, when she reached up to grab something from a shelf, the movement wasn't natural anymore. There was pain beneath it, controlled, hidden. But there, she tried to mask it well. But Elias had spent years observing wounded animals, cattle hiding a limp, a horse trying not to favor a leg. He knew that look, a look that said, "Don't ask, don't see." At first, he tried to convince himself it wasn't his business. She was free to come and go. She was paid fairly. She never complained. If she wanted to say something, she would. But it started getting worse. By the 4th morning, he found her hunched near the woodpile, breathing heavily. The kind of breath people took when every movement burned. He asked if she needed help. She quickly shook her head, not looking at him, then rose and carried the wood inside. That night, something gnawed at Elias. He couldn't sleep. The wind howled across the plains like it was trying to deliver a message. Something was off. He could feel it in his gut, a sense he'd learned never to ignore. It wasn't just the limp. It was the way her eyes darted toward the tree line when she thought no one was watching. The way she flinched when someone knocked at the door. The way she kept her travel satchel packed and sitting by the kitchen wall, as if she expected to need to run at any moment. Elias tried to push it down. He didn't meddle in folks' pasts. But that night, when he went out to check the stables, he saw something he hadn't expected. Behind the barn, half buried in the mud, were blood-stained rags. Fresh, not days old, not from some animal. The coppery smell clung to them like a warning. He picked one up with his gloved hand. Tucked within it was part of a broken belt women's leather, worn at the edges, cut clean in the middle, deliberately. That changed everything. The next morning, Elias decided to ask carefully. Maria was at the stove, cooking eggs. He watched her movements. Stiff, calculated. Her face was pale. Her right hand trembled when she cracked the second egg. "You all right?" Elias asked. She didn't turn around. "Yes, Senator." He didn't speak for a moment. "You're limping." Silence. Then, "Just twisted my foot in the chicken coop." "It's nothing. You sure about that?" His tone wasn't rough. But it wasn't soft either. She turned then. Her eyes were dark, almost too calm. "I'm fine." But Elias saw the lie behind her eyes. It wasn't the limp that worried him now. It was the fear-deep, quiet fear. Not the kind caused by an accident. The kind that came from something or someone close and dangerous. He wanted to push. He wanted to ask more. But something in her expression told him now wasn't the time. That afternoon, while she was resting, she always took an hour at midday. He did something he normally wouldn't have. He went through her satchel. He expected to find a Bible, a worn shawl, a picture maybe. Instead, he found a sealed envelope, creased, handled too often, water-stained but protected. It bore an official seal. Warden's Office, New Mexico Territory Correctional Facility. The name on the front was crossed out violently in ink, almost scratched through. He didn't open it, but beside the letter was a folded document that hadn't been sealed, a testimony transcript, signed by a federal marshal. Words like witness protection, domestic confinement, and escaped convict still at large leapt off the page. He exhaled. Slow. Maria wasn't just running from poverty. She was hiding from something, someone. And that someone was likely still out there. He returned the items exactly as he'd found them, closed the satchel, and left it where it was. That night, a storm broke out over Dry Hollow. Rain fell like bullets on the tin roof. The ranch house creaked and groaned under the force of the wind. Elias couldn't sleep again, not with what he knew, not with what he suspected. Somewhere out there, someone dangerous had a reason to hurt. The woman under his roof. Someone who'd once controlled her and wasn't finished yet. Around midnight, he heard a sound outside. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out onto the porch. Lightning split the sky. For a moment, he saw a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat, standing at the edge of the tree line, watching the house. Then the figure disappeared into the dark. Elias stood there for a long while, rain soaking through his shirt. Someone had found her, and whatever was coming next wouldn't be quiet. The stars hung cold and silent above the ranch, but no one slept that night. Not Maria, whose hands trembled as she loaded the silver pistol Elias had returned to her. Not Elias, whose boots hadn't left the porch in hours. And not Sheriff Braden or his deputies, who now camped in rotations behind fences, in the barn loft, and even in the tall brush behind the water trough. They all knew the truth. Now Delgado wouldn't leave without trying to take her, and he wasn't. Bluffing about having help. Preparations before the storm at 3 a.m. Elias stood at the barn with Deputy Cole, checking the lanterns, oil levels, and the positions of every man stationed across the property. "How many do you think he's bringing?" Cole asked quietly. Elias thought a moment. 2, maybe 3. Enough to make a fast hit. They won't try a full standoff. They'll sneak in, cause confusion, grab her, and vanish before we can stop them. Cole nodded grimly. "Any chance?" "He waits till daylight?" "No," Elias said. "He's waiting for the moment we let our guard down." In the house, Maria sat at the kitchen table with her shawl wrapped tightly around her. Her face was pale, eyes bloodshot, but she wasn't crying. "Not anymore. I won't run again," she told Elias when he stepped inside. "If he comes, I'm fighting. I want this to end." Elias nodded. "Then we'll end it here." He gently placed a revolver on the table beside her. "Loaded. Safety's tricky, but I'll teach you before the sun's up." And he did. They spent the next half hour going over everything: entry points, fallback positions, lantern signals. Braden joined them, laying out a crude map of the ranch, marking where each man would be. "This isn't a war," Braden said, "but it'll feel like one." Then, just before dawn, the wind died. The air turned too still. Too quiet, Elias knew. That silence, it was the kind of quiet right before a shot rang out. The first shot, it happened at 5:03, a shout. Then a rifle crack. The shot echoed across the property like thunder. Elias and Braden ran from the house, guns raised. Deputy Cole came sprinting from the barn. "South fence," he yelled. "They're coming in from the dry creek bed." Then came another shot closer. From the tree line, 3 riders burst through the low mist. Faces covered in bandanas, rifles flashing in the first gray light of morning. Behind them, Delgado rode like a ghost, calm, controlled, his black coat flapping. Behind him like wings, Maria. "Get to the pantry now." Elias barked over his shoulder. She hesitated, just a moment, but did as told. Braden and 2 deputies fired from the well cover, driving one of the gunmen off his horse. He hit the dirt hard, groaning, his rifle skidding out of reach. Delgado didn't flinch. He dismounted smoothly and moved like a shadow toward the side of the house, ducking behind a stack of firewood. He wasn't shooting yet. He was watching, stalking, waiting for the others to cause enough chaos to draw the defenders away from the cabin. That was his plan. But Elias wasn't playing by those rules. The close-quarters fight. Elias circled around the east side of the cabin, eyes scanning, rifle raised. Delgado was there waiting, his pistol already in hand. "I was wondering when you'd show," Delgado said with a smirk. "I told you once, she's not yours." Delgado stepped out slowly, gun aimed low. "You're not law. You're just a lonely man with a broken fence line and too much pride." Elias fired first. The bullet clipped the wood stack as Delgado dove for cover. Return fire followed, splintering a post inches from Elias's head. They circled each other in the pale morning light, ducking behind wagons, stone troughs, barrels. The gunfight was messy, chaotic, personal. One of Delgado's men tried to flank Elias, but Braden dropped him with a clean shot from the barn roof. 2 down. One left. Then it happened. Delgado made a break for the cabin. He sprinted low, fast, toward the back door. Elias screamed Maria's name as he chased, boots pounding. The dirt. Maria didn't wait. She was waiting behind the pantry door, pistol drawn. When Delgado burst through the kitchen, she fired once, missed, then again, grazing his shoulder. He howled in pain and lunged at her, knocking the pistol from her grip. They struggled. She clawed, kicked, bit, fighting for her life. Elias tackled him from behind. The 3 of them crashed to the floor, shouting, gasping. Delgado reached for his knife, but Elias grabbed his wrist, slamming it into the floor. Maria kicked the blade away. Then she grabbed a skillet from the stove and crack. Delgado dropped like a sack of flour. Aftermath and backup. By the time the sun crested the hills, Delgado was tied and bleeding, half conscious on Elias's kitchen floor. His men were disarmed, one wounded and moaning, the other unconscious beside the water trough. Braden stood with hands on his hips, surveying the damage. "You all right?" he asked Elias. Elias nodded. "Maria?" She stood near the wall, shaking but alive. "I'm okay." "Good," Braden said. "Because the marshals are 2 hours out." Elias raised a brow. "You called them last night?" "Damn right, I did," Braden said. "Didn't trust that bastard to play fair." The deputies rounded up the outlaws, bound them, and loaded them into wagons. Delgado, half lucid and still cursing in Spanish, was gagged before being hauled away. Maria watched it all with silent eyes. When it was over, she sat on the porch, the same spot where her limp had first been noticed. Elias brought her coffee. She stared into the sunrise. "I'm free now," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Yeah," Elias replied quietly. "You are." She looked at him. "You didn't have to help me." "But you did." He gave a half smile. "You walked with pain for weeks and never asked for pity. That told me what kind of person you are." Maria exhaled, nodded slowly. "I think I'd like to stay, if that's all right." Elias looked out over his land, then back to her. "I'd like that," he said. And for the first time in many seasons, Dry Hollow felt quiet and safe again. End of Part 4. Summary: this final part brings the tension to its climax. A full ambush, a face-to-face fight, and the unraveling of Delgado's arrogance. Elias's growth from silent observer to active protector reaches completion as he puts his life on the line. Maria, no longer a passive survivor, takes her stand. And in the end, justice isn't just served, it's earned through grit, courage, and loyalty. The sun crept over the horizon like an exhausted eye trying to open. Pale orange bled into the clouds, but the air remained heavy wet from the night's rain, and thick with a tension that hadn't lifted since Elias found that dead crow hanging on his barn gate. Maria hadn't slept. Elias knew because he hadn't either. Every creak of the cabin floor, every cry of a night bird or rustle in the trees made her flinch. Even now she sat at the edge of the porch, her knees drawn up, her gaze locked on the tree line as if willing the shadows to confess their secrets. Elias came out with a satchel over one shoulder and his lever-action rifle slung low. Inside the satchel, the court papers, the bloodied rags, the pistol, and the broken belt. Enough evidence, he hoped, to convince even a skeptical sheriff. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Maria looked up. Her face was pale but determined. "I'm not staying here alone," he nodded. "Then you ride with me." The ride to town, they saddled up his two horses, Granger and Dusty, and headed out, riding hard through the scrub brush and over the rocky trails toward Dry Hollow. It was a good 2-hour ride, and both of them watched the road behind them as much as the one ahead. Every crow overhead made Maria stiffen. Every gust of wind carried the ghost of that mocking whistle. Elias remained calm on the surface, but his eyes constantly scanned the hills. He'd faced outlaws before, even stared down a few with rifles drawn, but this was different. This was personal. By the time they reached the town's edge, the morning sun had burned off most of the fog. Dry Hollow looked as sleepy as ever, dusty, slow-moving, almost unaware that something dangerous had crept this close. But that illusion wouldn't last much longer. Sheriff's Office Sheriff Hal Braden was an old warhorse, broad in the shoulders, leather-faced, and uncheckable behind his iron spectacles. He was sitting at his desk going through paperwork when Elias and Maria walked in. Elias didn't waste time. "Sheriff, we've got a problem," he said, "and I don't think it's going to stay small." Braden looked up, blinked once at Maria, then motioned for the door to be closed. "Sit down. Start talking." Elias laid the documents on the desk one by one, the testimony, the court filings, the prison letters, then the rags, then the pistol, then the silver button torn from a coat they found snagged on a fence back at the ranch. Braden read each one carefully, his brow furrowed deeper with every page. Finally, he sat back in his chair and exhaled, "Antonio Delgado." Maria winced. "At the name, I heard rumors," Braden said, "about him bribing his way out. Thought they were just ghost stories." "They're not," Elias said. "He's here, stalking her. Last night he left a dead crow on my gate." Braden looked at Maria. "Did you see him yourself?" She nodded. "Not his face, just his figure. But I heard the whistle. It's his. He used to do it every time before he punished me." Braden's jaw tightened. He stood and went to the door. "Deputy Cole, inside, now." A young deputy in a canvas coat hurried in, adjusting his gun belt. "Get 2 men. Ride out to Vance's ranch. Quiet like, no sirens, no warnings. Watch the tree line, the ridge, the barn. Set up a perimeter. Whoever this bastard is, he's not getting. Close again." "Yes, sir." Braden turned back to Elias. "You did the right thing. We'll protect her." But Elias saw the flicker of worry in the sheriff's eyes. He wasn't certain. Not yet. Back at the ranch, the watching eyes by the time they returned. To the ranch, Braden's men were already in place. 2 deputies were stationed on the roof of Elias's tool shed. Another waited with binoculars in the hill behind the paddock. Maria stayed inside, pacing. She flinched every time a floorboard creaked or a hawk cried overhead. Elias, meanwhile, walked the property with one eye on the horizon. It wasn't fear that gripped him, it was fury. Fury that someone had dared to turn his quiet land into a battlefield. That a woman who had asked for nothing more than peace now lived in terror on his soil. Late that afternoon, just before sunset, a shout rang out. "Rider! From the east!" Elias rushed to the front porch. Through the clouds of dust. Rising over the slope, a lone man on a chestnut stallion emerged. He didn't ride fast. He didn't hide. In fact, he sat tall in the saddle, dressed in black with a wide-brimmed hat, as if the land itself belonged to him. Maria stepped onto the porch behind Elias. The moment she saw him, her breath left her body. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Delgado." The man rode to the edge of the property line, then stopped. For a moment, he simply stared, eyes dark beneath the brim, his mouth a thin, cruel line. Then, almost lazily, he lifted 2 fingers to his lips and whistled. That same tune, that haunting, eerie, taunting whistle. Maria trembled behind Elias. One of the deputies raised his rifle. Elias held up a hand. "No." "Not yet." Delgado smirked, then turned his horse slowly. And without a word, he rode back into the hills. The sheriff's warning the sheriff arrived an hour later. Dust on his coat, anger in his eyes. "I saw him," Elias said. "Plain as day." Braden nodded. "Name matches. Got an old warrant with his face on it. But he's smart. Didn't cross onto your land. Didn't threaten anyone directly. Just enough to rattle cages. So what now?" "I'm calling for backup. U.S. Marshals. He crossed state lines. That puts him in their jurisdiction too." Maria sat in the corner of the parlor, wrapped in Elias's old wool blanket, her hands still shaking. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He doesn't wait long. That was his game. The scare, then the strike." Braden looked at her seriously. "Then we'll be ready. And we won't wait." He placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "If you see him again, don't wait for my permission. You protect this place however you need to." Elias nodded once. He knew what that meant. Next time, there would be no warnings. Night falls. And the trap is set that night. They didn't sleep. Sheriff Braden left 2 more deputies on the property and set up lantern signals between them. Maria stayed in the back room with a pistol beside her. Elias kept watch from the porch, his rifle across his lap, a single lantern glowing by his boot. At midnight, the wind changed. A dry, electric current rode the breeze. Coyotes howled in the distance. The smell of gun oil hung thick in the air. Then Elias saw it, a glint of metal near the west pasture, a shadow slipping between fence posts. He was here. Elias lifted the lantern and gave the signal. 3 quick flashes. In the distance, other lanterns answered. Then the sound of footsteps, boots in the grass. Deputies surrounding. But Delgado wasn't running this time. He stepped into view, rifle on his back, long coat billowing slightly. His eyes locked on Elias. "Evening," Delgado said. His voice was smooth, like velvet stretched over a knife. "You've got about 10 seconds to explain yourself," Elias said. Delgado smiled. "Just here to collect what belongs to me. She's not yours." "Funny," Delgado said. "She used to be." In that moment, every man raised their rifle. But Delgado simply raised his hands. "You're going to need more than rifles," he said calmly. "I've got friends. You think I walked into this valley alone?" Braden stepped up beside Elias. "We're calling in the marshals. You leave now, or you'll be leaving in chains." Delgado's smile faded. His eyes narrowed. "We'll see." And just like that, he turned and walked away, not a flinch, not a glance over his shoulder, like he already had a plan. The next morning dawned gray and sullen. Storm clouds lingered low over the hills, and the mud-soaked boots the moment one stepped off the porch. Elias Vance didn't sleep much the night before, not after what he saw standing at the tree line. During the lightning flash, whoever that man was, he didn't belong there. And more importantly, he hadn't come by accident inside the house. Maria was already up and dressed, her shawl draped around her shoulders as she stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove. Her movements were slower than usual, her face pale and eyes ringed with weariness. She offered him a soft, tired smile, but there was something hollow behind it, forced, measured. Elias sat at the table, silent as she placed a bowl in front of him. "You see anything last night?" he asked after a long pause. She paused for a second too long. "No, Senator. Why?" He watched her carefully. "Just seemed like someone might have been out near the trees. Could have been a drifter." She looked down. "Maybe an animal." "But—" He noticed it, that subtle tremble in her fingers as she gripped the ladle. Fear. Elias nodded once. Didn't press. But he'd made up his mind. Later that day, the search for truth begins after breakfast. Maria took to the garden behind the shed to tend the vegetables, another piece of routine she used as armor. Elias watched from the barn loft window until she was out of sight. Then he moved quickly, boots silent on old floorboards, as he returned to the smokehouse behind the barn, the place where he'd found the bloodied rags. This time, he brought a lantern and a crowbar. The floor of the smokehouse was made of cracked stone and packed earth. In the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of unused timber, he found something that didn't belong. A false panel, wedged between the stones. With careful pressure, he pried it open. What lay inside wasn't much, but it was enough. A bundle of papers, rolled tight and sealed in waxcloth. A leather-bound photo album, singed at the edges. And underneath that, wrapped in more cloth, a small silver pistol, the barrel rusted. But still dangerous. He unwrapped the papers first. They were court transcripts, some hand-copied, some stamped with official seals. His eyes skimmed quickly. Dates from 2 years ago, charges of false imprisonment, domestic assault, and even trafficking. Witnesses listed, names redacted. But one name stood out in the corner of every page, always scratched out, always inked over with shaking hands. Antonio Delgado. The pages detailed events from a mining town near Santa Fe. A woman had testified. One of the final pages bore a signature. Maria R. Mendoza. She hadn't just run from trouble. She had escaped it and put a man behind bars. A powerful, violent man. And now, someone had tracked her down. The confrontation in the barn. Elias waited until sunset. Maria was sweeping the porch when he called her name. "Maria, got a minute?" She looked up. Tension flooded her face, but she nodded and followed him without a word. He led her to the barn, where the smell of hay and leather filled the air. He stopped near the center, where the lantern hung low from a beam. The light flickered, throwing long shadows against the wood. She stood silently, waiting. "I found the papers," Elias said plainly. She closed her eyes. "I wasn't snooping," he added. "But I needed to know what kind of danger you brought to this place." A long pause followed. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost didn't hear, she spoke. "He's not supposed to be out." "Delgado?" She nodded. "He had money, people in high places. I testified in court because I was promised I'd be safe." Her hands gripped the edge of a stall door. "They gave me a new name, a chance to disappear. I came here because it was far, quiet. I thought I had time." Elias studied her. "You didn't twist your ankle in the coop," she shook her head. "No. He found me a few weeks ago. He left a note on my pillow. Just one sentence. You look good in the hills. Her voice cracked. I didn't know if he'd kill me that night. Or wait, but I knew I had to act like nothing was wrong. I've done it before. Why didn't you come to me? Elias asked. Her eyes welled. Because I didn't want to drag you into it. People get hurt around him. I've seen it. Elias stepped closer, his voice steady. You're already here, and so is he. That makes it my business. The decision to act the silence in the barn grew thick. I need to know, Elias said. Is he close? I think so, she whispered. I've seen movement in the trees. Heard whistling at night. It's his habit. A mocking kind of whistle. One I'll never forget. Elias clenched his jaw. The pieces were fitting together. The figure by the trees. The blood-stained rags. The limp. The pistol hidden in the SMOKEHOUSE. This man wasn't just a threat. He was playing with her. Stalking her slowly like a wolf circling its prey. Where? Not waiting for him to come closer, Elias said. Tomorrow I ride into town. I'll speak to the sheriff. Maria looked up, panic flickering in her gaze. The sheriff might not believe me. Delgado has connections. He made evidence disappear before. Elias gave her a level stare. Then I'll bring what I found. The papers, the gun, and my word. I don't bluff. She blinked, stunned by the certainty in his voice. Then slowly she nodded. For the first time in weeks. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. That night, one final warning just before dawn. Elias was woken by a sound he hadn't heard in years, a rattling at the barn gate. He grabbed his rifle, boots, still half-laced, and stepped onto the porch. There, hanging on the barn gate, swinging gently in the breeze, was a dead crow, its neck snapped and feet tied with black thread. A symbol, a warning. Maria saw it too. Her breath hitched when she stepped outside. He used to leave those for me, she whispered. Before things got bad. He's close, Elias said. Too close. Then, almost as if summoned by the moment, a low whistle echoed through the trees. Maria froze. That's him. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. Then we ride at first light.